Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching. This is Roger Singh. That's my name. And I'd like to introduce this new video on Marthe Thiry. It probably will be the last video that I make in my age and my state of health and the current circumstances. My health is not very good. I've suffered 3 heart attacks and 2 strokes, which is why my speech is not brilliant. I hope that you will forgive me slurring, pausing, hesitating through the video and not get too frustrated. I will try my best, but please watch the video all the way through. The purpose of the introduction to this video is to explain something to all fans of Marthe Thiry. And I will begin by saying this. I wrote a 500-page book about Marthe with a lot of information in it. Those of you who read it will probably be asking the questions. Where did all that information come from? Where did Roger Singh know how Hector met Mathilde? How did Roger Singh know how Marthe died when there's no cause of death on a certificate? How do you know all that? Well, I'll tell you. And prepare to be shocked. Marthe told me. Marthe communicated with me as a spirit and told me all these things. I didn't put them in the book. I didn't put them in the videos because I was certain that if I said this, all of you would think I was crazy. And I'm not crazy. I believe in evidence. I'm a man of science. I've studied science all my life. I went to medical school. If I hear it, I question it. And if I see it, I believe it. So when this Marthe came to me and communicated with me, I thought to myself, my God, I must be going mad. Yeah, I mean, when people start hearing voices, they go and see a shrink, right? So I went to see a shrink, and the shrink examined me. And at the end of it, he said, well, I'm sorry, he said, Mr. Singh, I can't find anything wrong with you. And I thought, well, that's great news. That means I'm not crazy, but I'm hearing ghosts. So that's where I got the information from. And the funny thing is, when I had the information, when I got the information, and I went around and doing the research that I did, because I used to be an internal auditor, very, very good at finding facts and finding information, very good with documents and very good at tracking things down. And also I was a senior registrar, which meant that information was my business. And that's what gave me the ability and the skill to track all the information about Marthe. And when I did, I found out, to my horror, that it actually agreed with what Marthe had told me. Now, if everything is in your head, you know, where did the documents come from? And very recently, the spirit of Marthe began to manifest. That means, you know, sights and sounds. I would see things moving by themselves. I would hear laughter, singing, and a scream. And I thought it was in my head. But the next time it happened, I turned this phone on and went to investigate. I did that a couple of times. And when I played back the recording, the voices were there. So the voices are not in my head. How do you explain that? So what I've done before I die, I wanted to make a record and tell people what happened. It doesn't matter if you think I'm crazy. I've got to tell you what happened. I've got to tell you what I know. I've got to tell you what evidence I've seen. And that it is my opinion, based on evidence, that spirits are real, the paranormal is real, Maybe it's a parallel universe or a different dimension or a different reality. I don't know. We don't understand the mechanics of how the paranormal works, but it exists. We don't know the mechanism by which we can see things that don't appear to be there. It could be that there are, when we die, we go to a different dimension, and at times two dimensions clash. So for a moment, we see something that's in the other reality, and that to us appears as a ghost. But it's not a ghost, it's a being in a different reality who can communicate with us, who has the power to talk to us. It could be that, we don't know. Maybe one day one of our descendants, our great-grandchildren or whoever, will investigate it and they'll find how the mechanism works and they'll be able to communicate back with them. Enjoy the videos. I don't want to scare you. I don't want to convert you. I don't want you to become a believer because I say so. All I'm giving you is information. And I'm creating a permanent record that will still be there when I've gone, so that people can look at it, analyze it, and hopefully carry on with the research. Thank you very much. Hello. Today is the 12th of October, 2021. It is 10 p.m. And I've decided to make a video about Marthe Thiry. Now, those of you who've seen the previous videos know the story. I was looking for a childhood friend, Kerry Godwin, who had helped me survive a very serious illness in hospital by becoming my friend and encouraging me. And while I was looking for Kerry Godwin, I came across a photograph of a young Victorian infant. And upon seeing this photograph, I was immediately drawn to it, and it was strange, I didn't understand, but I seemed to recognize the person in the photograph, the baby. It turned out, after my curiosity got the better of me, I wanted to know who this was, who had such a strange attraction to me. And I spent a lot of money and a lot of time on what people thought was a very foolish wild goose chase and a very expensive wild goose chase. I mean, how do you recognize a person from a photograph? How do you find somebody from millions of photographs that could have been taken at any time, anywhere in the world? But strangely, I succeeded. It took me 2.5 years and a lot of money in identifying the person in the photograph. It was Marthe Esther Clotilde Thiry, born in 1884, died in 1886. And the reason why I went to all that trouble was because I wanted to know who this person was that on seeing the photo, I seemed to recognize. How could I recognize somebody who had died such a long time ago? Well, things went from strange to incredibly unbelievable, because this Marthe, on the day that I visited her grave and laid flowers, and for some reason I had to take a doll and put the doll on her grave. I didn't know why. But she came to me in a series of dreams, and she spoke to me and explained a lot of things. First of all, she told me that I was her father, or at one time I was her father. My name was Charles Hector Thiry. I was born in 1852, and I lived in the Rue des Bouchers in Brussels, along with her older sister Helene and her mother Josephine Mathilde Marie Charles, who was known as Mathilde. She told me who my friends were. She told me about my parents. She told me about how I met her mother. Incredible stories. But they seemed to be important to her, although for me it made no sense because here I am, and I had no memory. In one dream, she took me to our former house and showed me the inside of the house and asked me if I could remember my workshop, because apparently I was a pharmacist and I made medicines, really cared about people. I was this white gentleman, a Frenchman, French-speaking, Belgian guy, with gingery hair and a moustache and a goatee. And I seemed to know this man. He had a lot of the characteristics that I have in this life. He was very much like me. He was rich, and that kind of explained something, because when I found Marthe's death certificate, I mean, the whole point of a death certificate is the cause of death. But Marthe's certificate did not have a cause of death. She died suddenly, unexpectedly, from an unknown cause. But a death certificate didn't have a cause of death on it. And it's the only one I've ever heard of that doesn't have a cause of death. And the reason for that was that her father was a rich man, very influential, and he absolutely prohibited a post-mortem. And somehow a post-mortem wasn't carried out. So the cause of death was not known and therefore not entered on the death certificate. But she told me how she died. She had a brain aneurysm. That's a congenital birth defect that is there, well, I mean, you know, through the pregnancy and from the birth. It's a time bomb in the brain. It's an artery that has got a very weak wall. And if the blood pressure reached a certain critical level, the aneurysm would burst and the person would either be severely disabled or die. So apparently, Marthe's sister Helene had a doll, and they would share it. Helene loved Marthe. She doted on her, and to her, Marthe was like a living doll. She would bath her and comb her hair and help feed her, and the sisters were very close. And Marthe would play with Helene's doll, and Helene one day said, "Why don't you ask Dad to get you a doll?" Because Helene had received it in Christmas 1885. So Marthe asked her father for the doll, and her father promised her that he would get the doll that day, being the 22nd of March. So he did his rounds and got back home at about 5:30, and he bought the doll. Marthe's mother had had visitors. Her two sisters had been visiting, so they sat and had coffee and croissants or whatever. And Marthe kept asking her mother, "When's Papa coming home with the doll?" And her mother got fed up, and she said to Helene, "Look, take your baby sister upstairs and play." So the sisters were just leaving as Hector got home. Hector being me, apparently. And he had the doll, and he asked where the girls were, and the mother said, "They're playing upstairs." So Hector said, in a loud voice, "Marthe, look what Papa's bought for you." The little girls heard their father's voice, and they came rushing down the stairs. Marthe was taking one step at a time because she was so small. Helene tried to get in front, and suddenly Marthe fell. She fell from the third step, so she didn't fall far. But when she collapsed at the foot of the stairs, both Hector and Mathilde expected Marthe to sit up crying. But she didn't. She just lay there. In her excitement at receiving the doll, where she didn't quite get the doll, but in her excitement, the aneurysm had exploded and caused a stroke. And the child collapsed. And immediately Helene said, I didn't push her, Mama. I didn't push her. So Hector dropped the doll. He ran forward. Mathilde got there before him. She picked Marthe up and her eyes were rolling. So she shouted to her husband in a panic, go get a doctor quickly. One of Hector's best friends was a doctor, and he lived round the corner in the street called the Petite Rue des Bouches, I think. And all this information came from Marthe. She told me all this. So either I'm crazy or it's all true. So Hector went up and banged on the door. Walter's wife opened the door and she said, Hector, he looked in a panic and he ran in and he said, Gunther, you got to come quick. Gunther was eating his supper. And he got his hat and his coat and they rushed over back to the house. The door was open. They went in there and there was Mathilde cradling Marthe on her lap. And Gunther took one look and he said, he called Hector over to the other room and lit his pipe and he said, look serious. I think she's had a stroke. And Hector, he was a medical man, he's a pharmacist. He said, well, how could that be? She didn't have high blood pressure. And then Gunther said, well, remember all the headaches that she complained about? And Hector remembered because Marthe would say, I've got a tummy ache in my head. So the headaches were a symptom of the aneurysm. Every time she got excited, the blood vessel would swell up and cause pain. And he said, it's very serious. Whatever has happened, it's very serious. And Hector said, well, will she survive? And to his amazement, the doctor said, well, let's hope she doesn't. Hector was confused. Well, you're saying that it's better if she doesn't survive? And the doctor said, yes, that's what I'm saying. Because if she does survive, she's going to be a vegetable. And he said, can you imagine what kind of life that would be for her? Not speaking, not being able to walk, drooling, vomiting, getting married, not having a life at all. And he said, it would be better if she didn't survive. And he said, you'll see to that, won't you? And he left. That night, Helene the other daughter is asleep. The mother's in the bedroom, sitting at Marthe's side. Marthe is unconscious. And Hector brings a vial, small bottle. And he says, I've got to give her this medicine. Mathilde says, well, she's unconscious. She'll choke. Well, he says, maybe if you help me, maybe we can give her this medicine. And Mathilde says, Hector was in that bottle. Because she could tell by his demeanor that something wasn't right. And Hector said, it's something that will make everything better, will make all this go away. Mathilde immediately realized that something was seriously wrong. And she said, what would happen if I drank it? And Hector, he sobbed. And he said, you would die very quickly. The Mathilde, of course, being the mother, went berserk. You're trying to poison our child? You're trying to kill Marthe? No. Marthe died the next morning at about 11 o'clock. She never regained consciousness, but she did say Mama twice. And Mathilde never forgave Hector for trying to poison their child. He tried to explain. He said, look, this was the best thing for her, you know. But she never understood, and they would constantly argue, and eventually Hector was very concerned about Mathilde's behavior. She would throw a tantrum, start smashing things, and Hector was very concerned about the safety of their daughter Helene, who was in the house and who could get injured, and the mental effect that seeing her parents in this situation was having on her. So very sadly, Hector decided that Mathilde had to go, and he divorced her. Now Marthe, she died, but she didn't pass over. Her spirit went to a place called the Void, and she stayed there for a time, looking in the house and what was happening. And she was very upset. Her spirit was very upset by the fact that her parents had divorced, because she loved both of them equally. After a time, her father and Helene left the house. Other people moved in. So Marthe's spirit started to wander, and wandered for more than 100 years, until she found her father, who had died and been reincarnated. And her father was me. I was Charles Hector Thiry. Now she knew who I was, but I didn't know who I was. And when I saw that photograph of Marthe, obviously something inside me, maybe my soul or my spirit or whatever, recognized her as my daughter, and saw the photograph in which she is dead. And that's why I started to grieve. Because although I didn't understand it from a conscious level, unconsciously, I knew that this was my departed child, who I had loved a great deal, and all the grief and trauma came back. So I went through 2 years trying to find out who this person was in the photograph without realizing that it was my daughter. And when I was looking for her, obviously I didn't know her her name. I was calling her my little mystery. Now it's funny, because every time I called her my little mystery, I was actually calling her by her name, Miss Thiry. Marthe Thiry, that was her name, Miss Thiry. It's strange. Anyway, so I wrote the book, I did the sculpture, did the paintings, everything, you know, and I started to get these strange dreams. In these dreams, this person would come to me and talk to me, saying that she was Marthe. The first time I saw her, she was like a 7-year-old, like a street urchin, you know. She wasn't tidy, her hair was a mess, and her clothes, they were dirty, and she looked like a street orphan. Maybe she came like that to try and get some sympathy from me, I don't know. But she had holes where the eyes should have been. They were just black holes. And she was sitting on a bench in a little, like a kind of a park. And I was there and I looked around and I thought, this is a dream, but it looks pretty real. And I looked around and I noticed things as if I was awake. The dream, it wasn't a dream, it was more like a vision because I was in control. I could think and do what I wanted, whereas dreams seem to run like a film and you can't stop them. But I went up there and I sat next to this little 7-year-old, and she seemed to be having difficulty, very shy, looking down, looking up, she looked at me. And then she said, I am Marthe. Thank you for what you've done for me, and I'll see you again soon. She got up and she walked away. The next evening, the next night, I saw the same place. I had another dream. And this time, there was a woman. Dark curly hair, green dress, again, no eyes. And she came and she sat next to me. So I thought, well, this is who I must have come to meet in this dream. Kept looking at her, didn't recognize her, didn't know who this was. She kept on looking sideways at me. Now, I'm an artist, right? I draw portraits of people, and I know faces. So I took a good look at that face, and I recognized that this was that little child grown up. She'd come to me in the shape of a grown woman, but it was the same person. And as soon as I recognized who this was, it was an adult Marthe. She got up and she walked away. Didn't say anything. The third night, she came, and this time she spoke to me. Okay? So I said, who are you? Who are you? And she looked at me and she said, the more important question is, who are you? And I said, what do you mean? And then she told me that I was Charles Hector Thiry, her father. And I didn't believe it. And I said, look, I said, I'm Asian, right? And you're white. It's... And she said, don't be afraid. She said, I won't hurt you. And then at one point she asked if she could touch my hand. And I said no, because I didn't know what this was. I mean, whether this was Marthe or whatever it was, to me this was, it might be dangerous, What do you want to touch me for, No. Then she said, I want to show you something. And she took me to the house and she showed me the inside of the house and asked me if I remembered any of it. And at the back of my mind, I started to feel the place was familiar. Very vague, but, it did look familiar. And then she pointed to the stairs. There was a wall there with a door in it, and through the door you could see a kitchen. And in front of the wall, there was a staircase that went up. And she said, that's where I died. And she told me the story about the aneurysm. Now, that was 10, 12 years ago. And she would come in a dream, and I kind of had enough of it. And I said, look, I want you to go away and leave me alone. And she said, look, if you tell me something, I will respect it, she said. So I said, well, respect this. Go away and leave me alone. Now, the last time I had any contact with this spirit, and I'm not saying I believe in spirits, because I'm not 100% convinced that this is not all in my head. But that was 3 years ago. And about 3 days ago, right, I heard these thumps, like something falling, like a person falling. Now, I live alone in this house. It's a big house, right? But there's no one else in the house. And I looked around and I didn't see anything that had fallen. So I thought, well, that's odd, these noises. And, well, it's a rural place, it's a village, so maybe there are rats, maybe all sorts of things, But also I spoke to a neighbour and they said, well, no, the rats can't get to the roof because there's no way for them to get into the roof. And if there were rats, you would hear them all the time. So they're not rats. And then other little things like all of a sudden, I started to feel apprehensive about a part of the house. I was fine, in this room, my bedroom, and walking around the hallway and other. But there was the kitchen. And the kitchen made my spine tingle. Like there was something wrong with the kitchen. And every time I had to go into the kitchen, I had a feeling I was going to see something in there. I didn't see anything. I would put my hand in through the door and turn the light on first, and then open the door, and there'd be nothing there. So I started to imagine that there was a little girl standing by the window in the kitchen. It sounds crazy. It sounds bad, But that's what I felt. Now, then I started to hear voices. Now, when you say that you're hearing voices, people immediately think of schizophrenia and because these people hear voices. But these voices were recorded on this phone. Because I turned the camera on and I recorded. And I could hear the voices coming from the phone. So the voices were actually there. And there was a child laughing. I went to the kitchen and I heard a scream. Oh, that scared the crap out of me. I ran back into the bedroom and shut the door. All right. I got in touch with a very good friend of mine. He's a kind of a clairvoyant medium. He's helped me with this Marthe thing, right? And he said, talk to her because she can hear you. And it seems that all she's trying to do is attract my attention. So yesterday, I gave Marthe permission to talk to me again. Now, this is after years, right? Immediately that night, the same night, I had a dream and she came to me and she had eyes. For the first time, she had normal eyes, brown eyes. And she seemed to have got the message that, having no eyes was freaking me out. So she came with brown eyes and she spoke in a very soft, almost a musical voice. And she told me I had to do 2 things. As if I haven't done enough for her, because I've done a lot. Written a book, sculpture, paintings, yet I didn't make a penny on them because I did it all for charity. I didn't want to profit on Marthe. I thought that was very unethical. But she wants me to marry her mother, who I divorced apparently in my previous life. Now the thing is, her mother in this life is a lady in Lima, Peru. And we have to go through a ceremony and get married. Now, I've never met this woman. I'm in contact with her, and believe it or not, she genuinely believes that she was Marthe's mother. That's a big surprise. So apparently we have to have a ceremony in a Catholic church because Marthe's parents were Catholic, and we have to ask a minister to marry us in the name of Hector and Matilde. Whether a priest would do that, I don't know, but that's what Marthe wants us to do. And then she will find rest. The other thing is, I have to protect her burial site. Now, the field in which her grave is located is to be dug up, emptied out, and the burial plots resold. And they're worth a lot of money. And I was forced to take out an injunction to stop the cemetery from digging up the field in order to preserve Marthe and her sister Emily's grave. Emily died very young. She died as a baby in 1879, but her burial is there in Park 22. And I have to protect these burials right now. They're going to exhume the bodies anyway, so that the cemetery doesn't have a problem with the exhumation. But they want me to pay for the coffins. Now, these are just not normal coffins. You can get a normal coffin for hundreds of pounds. These coffins, the law says, have to be zinc-lined and hermetically sealed. And they're £6,000 each. That's 12,000 quid. That's money that I don't have. So it's virtually an impossible task unless I can get £12,000 and give them to the cemetery so that we can buy the coffins. The cemetery have agreed to provide 2 burial pits, right, in the children's park for free. The exhumation will be free, so it's just down to the cost of the coffins. So the spirit doesn't seem to realize that there's this thing called money, right? Oh, well, you can do it. Dad, you can do it. It's not like that. Daddy doesn't have £12,000, Marthe, right? So tonight, I told her to go away and leave me alone for a month so that I've got time to think and time to make up a plan and see what I can do. Now, I didn't say any of this in any of my previous videos. I gave a lot of information in my other videos, but I never told you where the information came from. The reason for that is because 99% of you are going to say that I'm crazy. All right? But I'm not crazy. All that really happened. And for those of you who would insist that I was crazy, I went to see a psychiatrist and told him. And he examined me and very quickly decided there was nothing wrong with me. So that's official. I'm not crazy. Ghosts and spirits are real. They exist. Right? And I didn't believe it. And if anyone had told me, I would have thought that they were crazy. But from what I've seen, from what's happened, from what I've heard, and the videos that I've taken that show that these things are real, that's the message. That this Marthe, she's a real spirit, a real ghost, who says that I was once her father. And the funny thing is, I can recall and remember those days and those times of a previous life. And it is believed that we only have one soul, many bodies, but that we travel from body to body, from life to life, and that we still have the ability to remember those previous lives if we tried. And most of us don't. And I believe that that is a fact, that it's true. Marthe is a spirit. She's real. She's communicated. I remember pieces of my former life. And in this house, I have seen and heard things that I cannot deny and that I have recorded on this phone, and I will add them to this video so that you can see for yourself and decide for yourself. Okay, goodbye for now, and thank you very much for your interest. Good morning. This video is recorded the morning after the video that you've just seen. It's almost 8 o'clock, and today is Wednesday the 13th of October 2021. Now, I've had a few thoughts, and I thought it might be a good idea to explain a few things. Firstly, I mentioned that I used to go to a special place to see Marthe, like a park. There's a tree, a lawn, and a bench. And suddenly, it occurred to me that I recognized the tree. This tree really exists, and it's in the middle of the field in which Marthe is buried. It's that same tree. That just occurred to me. The second thing is the explanation about the doll, why I had to take the doll. The day that Marthe died, the day before, because she died on the 23rd of March, and on the 22nd, her father was supposed to get her the doll, and in a kind of a sense, it was the doll that killed her. She'd been waiting for the doll, getting more and more excited, and this aneurysm in her head was ready to burst. And then eventually when her father came home with the doll, her blood pressure reached a certain critical point and the aneurysm burst and she fell down the stairs. So Marthe never got the doll. So the spirit of Marthe expected me to get the doll and to keep that promise. So at the time I got the doll and I put it on a grave, I didn't know why I had to get the doll and why I had to put it on the grave. She explained to me afterwards that when I did that, I was keeping a promise. The third thing is that I called the doctor who came to Marthe's aid. I called him Gunther, and then I called him Walther. Or I think I said Walther first, then Gunther. His name was Walther Gunther. That was his name. Walter was his first name. So I'm sorry if any of you were confused by the fact that I called the doctor two different names. One was his first name and one was his surname. I have memories of my own. Most of the things that I've put in the book and in the videos were things that Marthe told me. But I do have memories of my own from my previous life. I can remember things that happened. I can remember events. Emotional events seem to be quite strong memories. For instance, I mentioned that Walter was one of my best friends. Now, I know that we went to school together. Walter was a little bit fat, and he was picked on by bullies. And it was when Hector intervened in a fight and protected Walter that they became friends, and they were lifelong friends. The fact that Hector was a pharmacist, there's a very interesting story, because when Hector intervened in the fight to protect Walter, Hector received a black eye. When he got home, the nanny, the housekeeper, who was the woman that had brought him up, he wasn't brought up by his mother. To him, the housekeeper and the nanny, she was his mother. And she knew him better than the mother. She could outguess him. She knew him inside out. So he got into a fight and she put this poultice on, and Hector, being very curious, asked what was in the poultice. And that was the moment that he decided that he would be a pharmacist. He wanted to help people, to serve people, and he would mix potions and heal the sick, and that's what he wanted to do. I also mentioned that Hector had a lot of characteristics in common with me. The only difference being I'm not rich. I wish I was. If I was rich, I could buy the coffins and finish the request that Marthe made. I mean, being from a rich family, I would imagine that she wasn't used to poverty. Her father would get her anything she wanted, or they had a very comfortable home. So money was never a concern, and therefore the spirit doesn't realize that there are people like me who are poor and who can't afford to spend £12,000 on coffins. And I just thought I would make these things clear. I'm sorry if I sound a little bit rambling, but I've got no script. I haven't written any of this down. It's all coming straight out. So sometimes you have to think a little. And I know when you're watching a video how distracting that can be. I do apologize for that. But the information that I've given, I hope is useful. I hope it's interesting. Certainly for me it is, because you're looking at a non-believer. I mean, ghosts and spirits and goblins, and no way. I was not a part of that. And then this thing happened. And I have to admit, on the basis of what I've seen, what I heard, what I know, what I've experienced, ghosts are real. And Marthe is a real spirit. I've heard her. I've seen her. I've spoken to her. She's told me things that once she's told me, and I've done the research, I've found the documents and it all ties in. For instance, I didn't know that Marthe had a sister, or that I had another daughter. And it was, she told me what happened to the firstborn, Emily. In January 1879, Emily was born, and she only survived for 17 days, and she died of pneumonia. She told me this, and as part of the investigation, I was looking for documents, and I found a death certificate for an Emily Thiry, who died at that address, aged 17 days. So everything that the spirit had told me was true. I have not come across anything that Marthe has told me that has not turned out to be true. Her mother did leave the house, and she left, and she lived in an apartment in St. Giles in Brussels. Her father never remarried. Helene got married at some stage, but she had no surviving children. Whether either she didn't have children or none of the children survived, I don't know. Marthe showed me the house. I recognized the house. And when she told me about how I met her mother, or when Hector met Mathilde, I remembered that time. I remembered how nervous I was, and how when I first saw Mathilde, I thought of a baby bird in a nest, and how cute she looked. And the conversation I had with her, I remember the fact that Renee, the nanny who had raised me and who took me to see Mathilde on some pretext, how she had arranged for me to be alone with Mathilde so that you can do whatever you men do, she said. And she said, well, I'll go and get a spoon for the medicine and you'll be alone with her, right? And I remember that when she said, I think I'll go for a spoon. So I turned and I winked at her, and she winked back. And for a horrible moment, I thought Mathilde had seen her wink. and said, what the hell's going on? But fortunately, she didn't. So while Renee was gone to get the spoon, and she said she would take a while to give us a little time to talk, Mathilde said, I feel I know you. I think I've seen you before. And I said, well, no, I don't think so. I don't think we've met. And she said, Paris. Have you ever been to Paris? And I said, no, madam, I'm afraid I've never been that far afield. And she said, there are so many beautiful sights in Paris. And I said to her, one does not have to go to Paris to see a beautiful sight. Isn't that just marvelous, right? But that's what I came out with, and the conversation just went perfect. And she was impressed, and eventually he got the girl. He married Mathilde, but he had a friend of his, Edouard Toussaint, who also loved Mathilde, and the two of them fell out. And when Hector got married, on the day that Hector married Mathilde, Edouard turned up drunk with a pair of dueling pistols, and he wanted to shoot it out between the two of them to see who would get Mathilde. Fortunately, he was that drunk that the wedding guests managed to disarm him and send him home. And Edouard became an alcoholic because now he had lost the love of his life. He had dreams of marrying Mathilde. And the funny thing was, he didn't even know her. He just fancied her from a distance and decided, that's my girl, you know. That's the way they were in those days, tally-ho and you know. And the sad thing is that Edouard Toussaint died an alcoholic. And his funeral, very strangely, took place on the same day as Marthe's funeral, the 25th of March, 1886. His funeral was in the morning. Marthe's funeral was in the afternoon. So, little interesting snippets. I hope that they help to tie things up and explain certain things. So, thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for your interest. And I hope that at least you're partly convinced, if not fully convinced, that spirits are real, that they do exist, and that we have lived many, many times in different bodies at different times. And I've been told by a very good friend of mine who's a kind of a medium clairvoyant that we only have one soul, but many, many bodies. And if we try, we can actually remember snippets of our past lives. So maybe you'll try that. I certainly can. So I'm convinced. And I'm one of those people, if I see it, I believe it. If I hear it, I question. And since this Marthe thing came into my life about 12 years ago, right, I've seen enough to convince me. Have a nice day, and thank you very much for your interest. Bye-bye. I'm recording this just in case anything happens. Marthe, I understand that you can hear me. I am told that you can hear my voice. I want you to know that your presence here is making problems for me. I am alive, and you were alive a long time ago, and you must realize that living people aren't used to hearing from dead people. It makes us uncomfortable, and there's only so much that we can take. Recently, you have been very active. I've heard you. I've seen you in my dream. You've spoken to me. You've told me a lot of things, most of which I have forgotten. But I will do my best to carry out your instructions, although I don't think that you understand or realize how difficult this is. I know what you're going to say, that the greatest difficulty was to identify you, and that took a long time and a lot of money. And I did it. And if I can do that, you're probably going to say, well, you can do the rest. But it doesn't work like that. I'm asking you very politely, as your father, to go away for a month and leave me alone so that I can think about what I'm going to do to help you. I realize that going away is not something that you would wish. I can feel your love, and you can probably feel mine, because I loved you a great deal. And life was very difficult when you left. As you know, your mother started acting strangely, and you probably saw us argue, and sadly that ended in divorce in 1898, when I was forced to divorce your mother because of the effect that it was having on your sister Helene. I was afraid that in one of her tantrums your mother would hurt Helene. So I had to make a decision, and I decided that your mother must leave. I know that this is not something that you were happy about, because you loved your parents equally. And I know also that you do not apportion blame on your mother, and you do not apportion blame on me. I did, under the circumstances, what I thought was best for the family. At some time, your mother and I both died, and we now live in this life. Now, I heard something there, and I know that you like to make your presence felt. You make noises, voices, even a scream. I heard a scream. Now, you don't have to do that, because I find that quite alarming. It's not something that I want you to do. I want you to stop it. And you will stop it. In 1 month, we can talk. You can come into my dream, and we will sit and we will discuss and talk about the next step. I have to explain to you the difficulties that you are creating. And these are very real difficulties. You probably don't appreciate them as a spirit, but you have to understand that there are limitations to what I can do at my age, in my state of health, and at this time. And I want to explain that to you in detail. I know you don't want to hear it, but you must understand that there are constraints upon what I can do. I want to help you. I will do my best for you. But you must help me. And you can help me by leaving me alone for a month and stop making these noises. I know that you're there. You don't have to tell me that you're there. But please, don't interfere in my life. There are certain things that I must do before I can get round to doing these things for you. We will meet again. I know we will. I know that you'll be waiting, and I know that you'll comfort me when my time comes. But you mustn't do anything to accelerate that time. I don't know if you made contact with your mother or how you're treating your mother, but you must take pity on her too, because she's aware of you and that she loved you like any mother, maybe a little bit too much. And she was very badly affected by your death, as we all were. And perhaps you can understand that this is not something that I'm asking of you out of choice. It is just something that has to be done. Thank you very much for listening, Marthe. And I'll talk to you in a month's time. days now, and there's